the reason we wanted to have you on is that, we have a real good idea of what the Browns were offering. They said it was a second and a fifth and Amari Cooper. We know that it was probably Kendrick Bourne and maybe a second or third from New England, maybe Matt Judon. We don't know. That was some speculation, but we know nothing about what the Steelers may be offering. I think it's cute. Steeler fans are so, every guy on the team is like, you can't have that guy. You want Nick Herbig? No. It's like, this is an all-pro wide receiver. He's 26 years old. Are you forgetting? But what do you think? I mean, do you have any idea of what the return may look like?
I think the Steelers feel like they've had enough leverage throughout this process where they don't have to give up one of their better players to make this trade happen. Provided, I always thought what would maybe force their hand would be if they felt another team was in a bidding war with them and would force them to up their offer. Like, I think Washington not being involved here is really hurting the return that San Francisco gets back in a trade, because the Steelers don't want to bid against themselves, essentially. And if he ends back in San Francisco, I think they would stomach that and have an easier time with that than if he were to go to another NFL team. But to answer your question, Larry, I was under the impression the entire time here that it was going to come down to draft picks, because the players the 49ers were talking about with the Steelers seemed like non-starters, and the players that the Steelers were comfortable giving up in the trade were guys that the 49ers really didn't want.
Let's come through those names if we could.
Sure.
So the first group first. Who were the names that you were hearing the 49ers wanted from Pittsburgh?
Going all the way back to around the draft, so talking about mid-April, late April, George Pickens came up from the 49ers perspective. I heard Pat Freiermuth was another guy who's a tight end who's in the last year of his deal, but he's more like a wide receiver. He can't block at all. Right. But there's receiver qualities there that I'm guessing a good offensive coach, which you guys have, might be able to fit him in and turn him into a matchup problem for teams around the NFL, the way that this team has failed to do so for the first part of this guy's career. So those are the two guys. I think Alex Highsmith, I don't have this for sure, Larry, but I would not be shocked if the 49ers also inquired about him. I mean, there's some question because of the 3-4 versus 4-3 defensive, philosophies. But I know with him, I just think let me put it this way. I think if the 49ers were more open and receptive to trading Aiyuk back in April, and they said, we need Alex Highsmith to make this trade happen, I think the Steelers might have gone for it. But I think what Tomlin doesn't want to have to do is go into a locker room here a month before the season starts and say, good news, bad news. We just got an all-pro wide receiver, but we had to give up like our third best defensive player to make that happen. And I don't think he wants to have to look TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and guys like that in the eye and say, we had to give up this very, very, very important part of our deal. Well, that's relative, but that subjective too. But we had to give up a guy that's beloved here to make this trade happen. So those are the guys I think San Francisco wanted initially. I don't know why they would still think they could get Pickens now, by the way. I don't think that was ever something that the Steelers ever entertained, even though Pickens has had his fair share of drama and kind of histrionics and all that kinds of crap here. And then as far as guys, I think the Steelers are trying to sell the 49ers on.
Yeah.
I had heard James Daniels, who's a guard who's going into the last year of his contract, who's a nice player, not a great player or anything like that.
Is he holding off Mason McCormick at right guard? Because I know McCormick is a hell of a player. He's an FCS player.
Yeah. So I think what would happen there, Larry, is they probably start Nate Herbig at that guard spot.
Right.
What they would have done, because I don't think the 49ers are going to take James Daniels. But what I think would have happened was Herbig would have played guard, and eventually at some point this season or at the latest, the start of next year, McCormick would become the starter there. And they've effectively told Daniels, we're not interested in doing business with you beyond this year because they like that guy they drafted in the 4th round that much. So there's Daniels, there's Calvin Austin, who I think had 17 catches last year, had a 75-yard touchdown against the Raiders in week 3. They haven't been able to figure out how to use him. He's very small. He's very tiny, but his claim to fame is that Sauce Gardner said when he was at Cincinnati, that was the hardest wide receiver that he had to cover in college. So that always gets recited and brought back up when we talk about the pros and cons of the guy. And then Dan Moore Jr., who so far has only been a left tackle. He claims he can't play right tackle. And it's a guy that the Steelers have been trying to replace in every draft, but seemingly can't get out of their lineup. He is like a cockroach who survives a nuclear winter because he has a million lives with his coaching staff and might end up starting week 1 again. So those were the guys I heard the Steelers tried to sell the 49ers on, and I don't think their football people were that impressed with any of those dudes.
Well, but now it's been reported that the Niners and Steelers have agreed to compensation. And then, we've heard it all. I mean, from the Niner perspective, they're in their Super Bowl window, and the same way it's going to be hard for Mike Tomlin or Omar Khan to, deliver bad news about good players that are leaving Pittsburgh. It's going to be a hard sell trading Brandon Aiyuk inside the Niners Super Bowl window for draft picks that won't be, realized until April of 2025. In fact, I almost think that's maybe a non-starter, to be completely honest. I think the 49ers they could take a draft pick, but they got to have a player coming back, I think, to make this a reality or make this palatable at all for them. And to make, the Trent Williamses, the George Kittles, the Nick Bosas, not freak out to Shanahan because they're losing a great player. What do you think? I mean, what are you hearing? Do you think it will be draft picks? And there, then the other speculation is that maybe what's taken the last 3 days or 4 days is that maybe the Niners are looking, if they are getting draft picks for a third team, that they could spin those picks to for a receiver.
Yeah, I always thought the second part of that, the wide receiver thing, the 49ers needing to incorporate a third team or to find another wide receiver on another team before they made this trade. I think there's a lot of people here that think, Larry, that the owner on San Francisco's end has held up this deal, that the football people on both sides have been ready to make this happen since I brought it up last week that it was done, and that there's something in San Francisco that goes beyond Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch that are making this a very difficult trade to pull off. Because you mentioned Shanahan's frustrations with what's gone on. And I think that they drafted a player in the first round and also brought Jennings back to prepare for life without Aiyuk. Now, maybe they did think that they were going to get a good player that they could use either at wide receiver or another position in a trade when they got started down this road. Or maybe they thought they could convince Aiyuk to go to one of these other places that wasn't Pittsburgh and get a better return back. But, I just don't think the Steelers ever thought that one of the things that was going to be a monkey wrench would be trying to get a third team into a trade. I mean, this is not the Major League Baseball winter meetings, Larry. Like, it's just how many, I don't have this off the top, how many 3-team trades have there been in NFL history? Like,
maybe none.
Right. So like that just seems almost nonsensical that like two very bright, astute general managers would have a conversation and say, well, now we need a third team to get involved. I mean, I'm a little bit perplexed by that part of this whole saga and soap opera that's gone on. I think the Steelers feel like they don't have to make the best, that they've never had to make the best trade offer because it didn't seem like it was realistic that Aiyuk would be back in San Francisco on a long-term deal. And they didn't, or they knew through conversations with his agent that he was not going to want to go and play in New England or Cleveland. So I think that that's the way they've conducted their business the entire time. Like, they're not going to be pressured into doing something that they ultimately don't want to do. They look at, for them, Larry, they look at the thing that is the most prohibitive about this deal, not entirely prohibitive, But the thing that is the biggest component of this is paying Aiyuk. And they don't want to do this double whammy where they give up a lot in trade compensation and then have to turn around and make him like the 5th or 6th highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And they think they have cooperation from Aiyuk's people to make a deal like that happen.